it was silly to me at first because breathing is so natural and intuitive. But in hindsight, now that, labor is behind me, I think that the breath work and breath practice that I did was the most important prep work that I did. And oftentimes it would just be in front of a mirror or even in the shower, or sitting at my desk for work. I would just practice deep, slow breaths, like 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out. And it seems easy to do, but it's actually, it was kind of hard for me to do the 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out, especially when you have such a big belly and you're trying to control your breathing a little bit more. But I felt that just taking those small moments throughout the day to practice my breathing intentionally made it more of a habit for me, that by the time labor came around, I knew exactly how to breathe.
Getting pregnant and giving birth are two of the most exciting things you can ever hope to experience in this life. The moment you think you could be pregnant, you're frantically searching for all the best information, which is why you're here today. I'm Stephanie King, and with my many years of experience as a professional childbirth educator, doula, and lover of all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, I'm here to make preparing for your birth enjoyable, empowering, and totally easy. Each week, I'll cover different topics, interview professionals, and get into the nitty-gritty birth stories from mamas just like you. And when you're ready for more, you can join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I take you step by step through exactly how to prepare your mind, body, spirit, and partner for a birth you love. So let's get started. Our reviewer of the week is S. Hemmelgarn, and she says, best way to prepare for birth. Currently pregnant with my 5th baby, and this is my 3rd birth listening to this podcast. I wish I would have found it when I had my first 2. It's such a game changer going into labor with all the amazing info and knowledge you gain from this podcast. Highly recommend to anyone and everyone who is pregnant, whether you want a natural birth or not. Thank you for that review. And if you guys haven't left one yet, make sure to do that, please. And it's kind of crazy to me to hear that people have been around now for their 2nd and 3rd and even some of them 4th pregnancies at this point. It's just weird to think that we've been doing this for that long, but I love it because it means we're making an impact. So all of you guys that are listening and as you share this stuff, it's bigger than you realize. And I love what is happening in the world right now in regards to birth, and that we get to be a part of that. And along with that, today we have another birth story, which is the best part of all of this. So Daizjah is here with me. Daizjah, will you say hello to everybody and just tell us a little bit about you?
Yes, of course. First off, thank you, Stephanie, for having me on here. I'm really excited to be here, and I love this podcast, so I'm excited for this to come to a full circle moment. So yeah, a little bit about me. My name is Daizjah. I'm 29 years old. I've been married for 2 years to my amazing husband and best friend, Sam, who's not able to be with us today. And we just had our first baby, Jordan, in January of this year. He's in my arms now. He's 5 months old now, which is crazy, just how fast time has flown by. I'm an Army veteran and military spouse, and I work from home now. And my husband is actually still active duty military, which is what brought us here to North Carolina. So I'm hoping that my story will provide a little bit of insight into giving birth at a military hospital as a spouse.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into this because this is a topic we haven't covered in detail. And I know it's going to be of extreme use to other women who are in this situation. So thank you for your introduction. And thank you, too, for being here with me. Let's dive into your pregnancy a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your pregnancy. Was it pretty, textbook, or did you have anything different that changed along the way? And then a little bit about your providers, too. Did you choose an OB or a midwife? And for what reason? Or did you have that option in the military hospital? Kind of walk us through your pregnancy.
Yeah, so I guess starting with a little bit of background beforehand. So I had been on the pill for quite some time, and in 2024, I had made the decision to get off the birth control pill because I had been on it for quite some time. And at that time, there was a lot of research coming out just about long-term use of the pill, and I kind of figured it was time for me to get off, especially with us wanting to have a baby soon. And then we had just eloped a year prior, but our wedding ceremony was actually coming up in May. So it was February. Our wedding ceremony was in May. So I figured it was time to get off, let my body adjust, and that way we can start trying for a baby right after our wedding ceremony. And in the meantime, during that transition period, I was like, oh, we'll just do natural family planning. So I bought the thermometer for basal body temp, and I ended up downloading the app Flow, which I know a lot of women use. And I figured I'd track my cycles and be really diligent, and I wasn't diligent at all. We actually just ended up kind of just winging it. So long story short, my period was late, and I kind of had this inkling. I'm like, all right, it's been a little over a week. It could be because I'm off the pill and it might be a little wonky, but I also could potentially be pregnant. So we got a pregnancy test, and I was in fact pregnant. And we were obviously shocked, but we were excited at the same time because we knew we want to try for a baby soon and we want to start our family. But when we found out, our ceremony was only 3 weeks away. And so, as you can imagine, I was just in the thick of wedding planning and coordinating everything for that. So there was a lot going on. But I also think it was kind of a helpful distraction for the first trimester. And with the first trimester, obviously, there's the first trimester symptoms. And I was really worried that I was going to be like very sick for our wedding. And then we also had a honeymoon right after our wedding. We were going to go to the Philippines for about 2 weeks. And so I was nervous. I'm like, oh no, I'm going to be in the middle of my first trimester. I could be like sick on my wedding day. So I just remember praying like, God, please just help me get through my wedding and this honeymoon. And then after that, I don't care like what symptoms I have. But luckily I didn't have any pregnancy symptoms really at all, which is nice, but also kind of terrifying as a first time mom. You just don't know if things are going well. But I didn't have like any nausea or vomiting, no weird cravings or anything like that. I will say that the worst thing I got was that extreme first trimester fatigue. I would sleep, over 9 hours at night and wake up the next day and still need a nap to get through the day, which was obviously kind of rough with working as well. Then on top of that, I did have a coffee aversion, which sucked because I was so tired and I drink coffee every single day, but I couldn't even handle the smell of it without wanting to gag. And then as soon as the second trimester hit, I did get a huge boost of energy. And that's what most moms told me. They were like, second try is kind of like the golden period of pregnancy where you have the cute little belly and your hormones aren't all crazy. And I completely agree. But overall, I felt really good. I also continued working out throughout my pregnancy. I'm very big into CrossFit. I love lifting, and I just loved what my body could continue to do as I grew a little human inside of me. And I continued to lift. I still felt very strong. Obviously, the cardiovascular side struggled a little bit. I did get winded pretty easily, but I was still very strong, which I loved. And I was definitely the crazy girl at my gym doing burpees and box jumps in the third trimester with a big old belly. But I never pushed myself to the point of being like in pain or uncomfortable. And I modified exercises when I needed to and took breaks as needed. And I also talked to my doctor about it. And the way that she explained it is like, during periods of increased movement, babies actually just kind of get rocked to sleep. And even though you might be jolting or moving very quickly or whatever, your baby's just kind of being rocked in that sack. And so I always just imagine him taking a nap while I was working out. So yeah, I did CrossFit all the way up until about 33, 34 weeks of pregnancy. And then I transitioned to stretching and lighter weights just because it got a little bit more difficult to do those CrossFit movements. And then obviously as I got bigger, I experienced the normal symptoms like the difficulty sleeping. I had super bad reflux at the end there. Like I could only eat very small amounts of food so that it didn't, start coming back up. I also had no idea this was a thing until I got it, but pregnancy rhinitis, I had rhinitis, I don't know how to say it, but I had that pretty bad towards the end of the third trimester where I was like constantly stopped up. Like I'd go to sleep, I couldn't breathe. And I know it has something to do with like just the rush of blood in your body, but that was just an annoying symptom that I had to deal with because it felt like I was sick, even though I wasn't sick. And then I also had Braxton Hicks, of course, and those just increased in frequency as I got closer and closer to labor. But overall, I did have a pretty easy pregnancy, and I absolutely loved being pregnant and experiencing all the different changes just in my body as a first-time mom and like feeling him kick for the first time. I think that was around like 18 weeks is when I felt him kick for the first time, and also just tracking his growth in my little pregnancy app and seeing what size fruit or vegetable he was. I loved it all. So, And then you mentioned providers. So the way that it works at a military hospital is you don't get assigned one single provider for your prenatal care. Unless you preference a particular provider, they're going to schedule you with whoever is available during your appointment. And even then, you're not guaranteed to see who you request. So I think I probably saw like 6 or 7 different providers, all ranging from like OB, nurse practitioner, midwife. And there were definitely ones I loved seeing. And those were the ones that were very intentional with their care. And they would listen and answer all of my questions. And I always came with a list of questions. I had like a notes page in my phone, and I just go line by line. And those providers, they didn't rush me at all. And I love that, because as a first-time mom, there's so much, so many new things happening. So you want a provider that's going to sit, look you in the eyes, and answer those questions. And there were some providers, I would say there was a couple that I had that I didn't like as much. And those were the ones that felt like they were just rushing me out of the room the second that I got there. And I just didn't appreciate that. So oftentimes, whenever I scheduled my next appointment, I would just ensure that I didn't see that provider again. And you can do that. It might limit, I guess, the times of your next appointment, but ultimately you can put providers on like a do not see list. But yeah, overall, I did feel like my care at the military hospital was great. Probably not as personalized as if maybe I went to, I don't know, a hospital off post. I know that the military hospital I went to saw a lot of women. So maybe there would have been more personalized care with a midwife at off post hospital. But I think that one of the doctors told me that Womack, the hospital, is like one of the what is a more progressive hospital, and that they do promote like delayed cord clamping, golden hour. They allow mothers to go to 41+6. I don't know if that's considered later than most hospitals, but they do let you go to 41+6 before needing to schedule an induction, and emphasis on schedule. I guess you're not necessarily required to show up. And they were also extremely supportive in my decision to hire a doula, which I appreciated as well. And I would tell them at all my appointments, I would be like, yeah, we do have a doula that will be with us at our birth. And the doula we actually ended up choosing was very well known for supporting moms through unmedicated labor. And a lot of the nurses and doctors actually knew her already, because she was the doula for many of the moms that came through that hospital. And I do if I'm able to shout her out, I would love to. Her name is Doris Ann, and her business is Doris Ann's Doula Services. And she's absolutely amazing. She's exactly who we needed to support us through pregnancy and labor. And I will say, initially, I did not want to get a doula, because I was just worried about a doula taking the place of my husband. And I wanted to still have those moments with him. But she was perfect in that she coached him and worked alongside him and kind of showed him how to support me while also supporting me. And, that was really important for me, because I still got those intimate moments with Sam supporting me during labor as well. And those are memories that I hold near and dear to my heart. And then also for anyone that's like worried about the cost of a doula, because I know that was kind of a factor for us, because we did have to come out of pocket. Insurance does not cover a doula if you're using military insurance. It was absolutely worth every penny. And I will never give birth without a doula. And I never thought I'd say that, because like I said, I thought I would never use a doula, but it's absolutely worth it. And I know that I've spent much more money on less. And when it comes to birth, this is such like a vulnerable and important moment in time that it is worth that investment. And I hope other women that are considering doulas, but maybe that cost factor is an issue. It's absolutely worth that investment. But yeah, highly, highly recommend Doris Ann in Fort Bragg area.
Awesome. If you give me a link to her, I'll make sure that everybody listening can have it in the show notes. So
definitely, I can do that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. That was like perfect amount of detail. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
How about coming up towards the end of your pregnancy? And yes, that was really progressive. All of the stuff that you mentioned was like, these are issues we have outside of military hospitals. And I, from what I've seen, have seen military hospitals be a little more rigid. So that's super awesome to hear everything that you just said.
Yeah. And I think they told me too that it's the lowest C-section rate for that hospital, has the lowest C-section rate, which is great for me to hear,
Yeah.
So
That's wonderful. All right. How about towards the end of your pregnancy? Was it pretty like textbook all the way through, or were there things that like popped up during any of your appointments later on? Also, just curious if you're willing to answer this, did you have any like vaginal exams or anything like that as you got closer to labor? And did you ever have to have that discussion of induction?
So I did end up going to 40 plus 3. And like I said, we could go to 41 plus 6. So I guess we didn't get the point of even scheduling an induction, which is great. I knew that I was going to wait until the very last moment until they're like, you have to put a date on the calendar. I did not want to be induced because I just wanted labor to start naturally. I knew that my body would signal when it was time. So I didn't end up having to have much of a conversation on induction because I didn't go too far past 40 weeks. As far as any sort of issues towards the tail end, I didn't really have anything that really happened. I was GBS negative, which I was excited about because I didn't want to have to start him out on any sort of antibiotics. All my scans looked great. 20 week anatomy scan looked great. And he was growing pretty much right on target every single appointment. They did like the fundal height measurement, and he was on target every single time. So there was no concern of like big baby or, he's not growing at the proper rate or anything like that. But yeah, I would say it was pretty textbook towards the end. I didn't really have any sort of major issues, no high blood pressure, any sort of concerns that the doctors had.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. How about actually curious about your providers in hospital. Were they all OBs? Did you have an option for a midwife?
You had an option. And like I said, you could preference a midwife, but it limited the number of times, or I guess the appointment times that you could choose from. I never put in a preference. There was an OB that I absolutely loved, and she was more progressive. And I would always hope that she was the one that was scheduled for my appointment. But, and I hoped that she was there for my birth, and she wasn't, but I ended up with another really awesome OB. But yeah, you couldn't necessarily choose. You kind of just showed up and it was whoever was there. So I had a wide range of OBs and midwives. I won't even say that I liked either better. There were awesome OBs that I saw. And I guess the couple of ones that I didn't like, one was a nurse practitioner and the other one I think was an OB as well. But for the most part, I don't think I had many issues because they are so progressive. They were totally fine with everything. Like I came in with my birth plan. I was like, hey, can you add these to the charts? Let's talk through it. And they were like on board. They were like, wow, this is awesome. So I didn't really feel like I got a lot of pushback in anything that I wanted, which I really loved. They were all very supportive of the fact that I was so prepared and I did have things that I wanted. And they were reasonable. I didn't ask, there was nothing crazy on my birth plan. They felt that because I did have a healthy pregnancy, I had no major risks or issues associated with my pregnancy. So I do think that they allowed me to kind of not dictate certain things, but just create a birth plan for the way that I saw things going.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. For your preparation, tell me all the things. Like moms want to know, what were those daily things? What was going on in your head? How were you preparing with your birth partner? Talk about the prep that you did.
Yes. So as far as the physical preparation goes, I did mention I worked out. I did a lot of CrossFit. I also walked quite a bit. I did all the things that you see on like Instagram, like the dates, the red raspberry leaf tea. I like inserted evening primrose oil at the end as my doula recommended. I also saw, and I think this was really helpful for me, I saw a Webster certified chiropractor, and I saw him about once a week towards the end there. And that was just helpful because obviously your lower back gets tight as your belly gets bigger. And I just felt like it kept me loose and limber down low. And he would kind of stretch in like, he had to do it really carefully because obviously I'm pregnant. So I didn't like lay on my stomach or anything, but he knew how to navigate adjusting a pregnant woman. So he was specifically Webster certified and would do these certain like adjustments on my body that I felt opened me up a little bit more when I got really tight. And I did that weekly. I did do a lot of bouncing on my ball. I work from home, obviously, so I traded out my office chair for the ball, and I'd sit on that for work instead. And then I would try to take breaks throughout the day to stretch. I will say I wasn't as good with the the stretching. Like some women are like, I did them every single day. I did some form of stretching every day, but it wasn't always like the 3 stretches. Sometimes it was just watching TV and just like sitting in a squat and stretching my legs or whatever it might have been. But I did try to do some form of stretching each day, especially at the end of my pregnancy.
I'm so curious if you have like pictures or video of yourself doing CrossFit during pregnancy. I love that.
I do. I have lots of videos because I wanted some sort of like, I wanted to see how my body changed throughout. So I recorded myself quite a bit throughout the 3rd trimester. And you can just see as my belly gets bigger and bigger. And I was still able to keep on moving. And like I said, I was doing burpees and push-ups and all the things. And it obviously some of it modified, but I did record myself, and I think I would encourage many women to do that just because it's cool to see what your body can do as you're growing a little human, like your little baby's working out with you kind of. So it was cool.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't carry you off.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just going to say, so that's like physical preparation, but as far as mental preparation went, aside from the birth course, which was awesome for us, I did quite a bit of breathing practice. And this seems like it was silly to me at first because breathing is so natural and intuitive. But in hindsight, now that, labor is behind me, I think that the breath work and breath practice that I did was the most important prep work that I did. And oftentimes it would just be in front of a mirror or even in the shower or sitting at my desk for work. I would just practice deep, slow breaths, like 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out. And it seems easy to do, but it's actually, it was kind of hard for me to do the 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out, especially when you have such a big belly and you're trying to like control your breathing a little bit more. But I felt that just taking those small moments throughout the day to practice my breathing intentionally made it more of a habit for me that by the time labor came around, I knew exactly how to breathe. And I felt comfortable with those deep breaths. And so like, I think that sometimes people discount breathing as a part of labor prep and we focus on all the things like dates and tea, but breathing is so important to preparing for labor because it calms your entire nervous system whenever you're able to just breathe slowly in and out. I also built a labor worship playlist that I would sometimes practice my breathing to as well. And I love that. I still listen to it to this day. And there's songs that I associate with labor because it was like songs that I heard while I was in the middle of labor. And those songs are really important to me now. And I did want to mention too, like faith played a huge role in our birth story as well. And we're both Christians and we believe that God is sovereign over everything to include pregnancy and birth. And we knew that going into it, that God had already written our steps. He already knew when our baby would come, how our baby would come. And just knowing that gave us confidence going into it, that we could just hold fast to that truth. And we didn't have to be afraid of all the unknowns that come with pregnancy and labor. And obviously there's a lot, especially as a first-time mom, that you just don't even understand or know. But ultimately, we just kind of had to pray our way through it. And there was definitely times during pregnancy and labor where I felt that fear creep in, the what ifs that every mom probably thinks of, the worst case scenarios that goes through their head. And I would just repeat this verse that my mom used to always tell us when we were littles. And we would get scared. We'd come to her bedroom at night and she'd have us repeat this verse. And it's, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And I repeated that verse even during labor. And even when the contractions felt completely unbearable and I wanted to quit, that's when I was like, I literally verbally, I would be praying like, God, please give me the strength for one more. Like, I know I can, I know I can do one more. Give me the strength for one more. And he always did.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It wasn't I know maybe you've heard my story, but It wasn't until my 3rd birth that I was going through it and that I thought to pray. And it became so much, I wasn't doing it alone. And it's such a big deal. I'm like, yes, if you are a woman of faith, if you are, and it doesn't have to be Christian, but if you believe in something greater than yourself that wants good for you and you lean into that and you ask for help, it does come. And I think there's no better time to be able to feel that, in your most vulnerable place where you need to be able to surrender and to allow that surrender to happen, to have strength from something else is like so powerful. So I love that you shared that. All right, let's walk through your birth. So talk to me through that very first contraction. How many weeks were you? Did you have an appointment? Did you know potentially like how dilated and stuff? Do you have any of like that kind of information? And it's totally fine if not. And then what did that look like?
Yeah, so his due date was January 2nd, and I remember specifically just not wanting him to be born on Christmas or New Year's because I didn't want him to have to share his birthday with a major holiday. And I was kind of thinking forward to when he'd have birthday parties, and I knew his friends would be at relatives' houses during that time. So I wanted him to kind of have his own day. So January 2nd rolled around, and I was like, all right, January 2nd's good. I'm just ready to meet my baby now. But there were no signs of labor at that point. Then the day after his due date, we're January 3rd now, we had a doctor's appointment scheduled, my 40-week appointment. And I texted my doula beforehand and I told her that I didn't plan on getting a membrane sweep unless I felt that conditions were favorable, for one. And in my mind, that was like, 2 to 3 centimeters dilated and at least 60% effaced. And she was like, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Let me know how it goes. So we get to the doctor's appointment and the doctor is like, all right, you're a day past your due date. Would you like to get a cervical check and a membrane sweep today? And I told him, I was like, I really want to avoid a membrane sweep because I wanted to go into labor naturally. And I didn't want that to be prompted from a sweep. But I told him, I said, I'm not fully opposed to just seeing where I am. And so he's like, okay, how about this? I will check your cervix and I will let you know where you're at. And then you can make the decision on whether or not you want me to continue to do the sweep. And so I was okay with that. So he goes in, he checks, and I'm 1 centimeter dilated and 25% effaced, I'm like, oh, dang it. And he's like, all right, do you want me to continue with the sweep now? And I said, no, I'm good. And I was hoping to be further. And I felt pretty good about just saying like, I'm good. I don't want that sweep. And I knew that cervical checks are just a snapshot in time from the birth course. All it tells you is where you are in that moment. And I knew that things could change drastically over the next couple of days. So we walked out of there and I had felt pretty confident in my decision at that moment. But going home that night, I did kind of wonder in the back of my mind, like, did I make the right decision? Like, should I have gotten that sweep? But little did I know the next day I'd be holding my baby. And I just say that to encourage moms that, you might go to one of your final appointments and you're not very effaced or dilated. Things can change very quickly. I was 1 centimeter, 25% effaced, and I had my baby the next day. So, and there's people that, might be 5 centimeters dilated and certain number of effaced, and they might not have their baby the next day even. So you just never really know. So on the next day, this is January 4th, we did everything we could to start getting labor going. We went for a long walk. I was bouncing on my ball and, I heard spicy food help. So I was like, we're going to get Thai and I'm going to get the spiciest Thai dish that's on the menu. And I just remember like the food was so spicy. My tongue went numb and I figured I'm like, oh, this is going to do it. Like he's going to pop right out. And I did my stretches, had my normal tea and dates. And I don't know if I thought that somehow these things would like magically bring on labor, because ultimately I knew that he wasn't going to come unless he was ready. And these things might help, but they're not necessarily going to dictate like when your baby comes. But I did notice that by the end of the day, I'm like, I just don't really feel any different. I don't feel like there's been a shift. I don't feel any changes. So I went to bed that night. I did feel kind of defeated, but like I said, I didn't know that hours later I'd be at the start of my labor. So I went to bed that night and I woke up at around 2 a.m. and I felt what I figured was my very first contraction. And the reason why I knew it was a contraction is because it felt like my normal Braxton Hicks where it's that tightening, but then I also felt that cramp, like that period cramp feel alongside of it. And that's how I knew that I was like, this doesn't feel like it's felt before. Like this one feels different. And it wasn't painful at all, just like noticeably different. And if you are very in tune with your body, you do notice that it's different. And they were about 30 minutes apart at this point and super manageable pain wise. I would say it wasn't even painful at all, but it was noticeably different. And even though I was excited and the first thing I wanted to do was shake Sam awake and be like, I think it's starting, I was like, nope, I need to just let him sleep. I'll tell him later. I need to get rest myself. And so I went back to sleep, and I got up around 6 a.m, and I knew that they were still continuing. So I texted my doula just to let her know, like, hey, I think I may or may not be in early labor. I just want to keep you updated just in case this continues throughout the day. And then I went back to sleep for a couple more hours. And it wasn't until 8 o'clock that I was just so anxious, like way too anxious and excited to even sleep at that point, that I woke up and I told Sam at breakfast, I was like, hey, last night I did start feeling some contractions, but they were spread out. So like, don't worry. They could stall, they could stop, they could go away entirely. So I don't want to get my hopes up. Let's just continue about our day. And so I did try to continue resting throughout the day, but it was too hard at that point, because I knew that, I was excited and things were starting, and you spend months prepping for this moment. And so it was hard for me to like truly rest. So at around, 10 a.m., I texted my doula that the contractions did start to feel more noticeable. Like I could feel that they were increasing in kind of that intensity. And she recommended nipple stimulation, sex, and rest. And so that's what we did. Like I said, it was really hard for me to rest, but I did lay down to try to like relax at least. But there was a point where I was like, I'm just ready to meet my baby. And I was like, I'm going to ramp things up. So I went outside, I started doing some curb walking. I got on my ball and started doing like pelvic ball rotations and like tucks and stuff, because I knew I'm like, he needs to be in a good position if this is going to continue and progress. And that's when things started picking up. So at 4 p.m., so we're in the afternoon now, contractions were lasting about a minute, and they were about 10 to 15 minutes apart. And I did text my doula that things were starting to get more intense, to the point where I couldn't ignore them anymore. I couldn't just go about my day and not notice them. But I was still capable of breathing through them. And she could tell from being on the phone with me. She's like, well, you still sound okay. Just, continue to keep me updated. And at this point, Sam warmed me up some soup. He warmed up some soup for me, because I knew I needed to have some sort of nourishment if this was going to be the day that we were going to go into labor. And he warmed me up some soup, and I remember I tried to eat it, but I just had zero appetite from how strong the contractions were. I was like slowly eating it, and I couldn't even it just wasn't appetizing at all. I just didn't want to eat. And so around 5:30 p.m., I texted my doula. I'm like, okay, things are really starting to build up here in both frequency and intensity at this point. The contractions were still consistently like 10 minutes or more apart. So she wasn't too concerned yet. And she was like, just try to sleep or get into the tub. So once again, I couldn't rest, because at this point they were so noticeable that I probably could have laid down, but I couldn't truly sleep. And so I was like, all right, I'll get into the tub. So Sam ran me a bath. He brought in my speaker to play my labor worship playlist. And I got into the tub and I labored there for about an hour. And the water was super hot, and it felt very good. And it felt so good. I think I might have leaned back and just like kind of dozed off for a little bit. And he had the lights dim, so it was really nice and relaxing. And I did feel like my contractions like kind of slowed down a little bit. But then I kind of woke up and I felt they like ramped up again. They got just like really, really intense towards the tail end of that hour. And I remember I stood up and I looked in the water, because I was like, okay, I'm done. I looked in the water and I saw my mucus plug floating in the water. And I called Sam in. I said, hey, I think this is my mucus plug. Like, you need to let our doula know. And so he texted our doula that I think this is around 6:30 p.m. that I had lost my mucus plug. And she was like, are you sure? We sent her a picture and she was like, yep, that's it. And so she confirmed that that's exactly what that was. And so she's like, all right, get out of the tub. And I want you to do 5 sideline contractions on the bed. And I want, Sam to time them to just see where you're at. And so I got out of the tub, I did 5 contractions, and by side lying, I'm like lying on my side, but one of my legs is crossed over, kind of hanging off the bed, if that makes any sense. And after that 5th contraction, I don't know why, but these contractions were so intense on my side. And after that 5th one, I just sat up and I threw up immediately, just from the intensity of them. And Sam let her know, like, hey, they're now less than 5 minutes apart and they're lasting about a minute. And she was like, all right, I think it's time for y'all to make your way to the hospital. And the plan was to labor at the hospital chapel. So we weren't going to get checked in right away because she knew I wanted to go unmedicated. And so she was like, it's probably best that we don't have you checked into triage until you feel like you're ready. And that way you avoid any sort of potential, I don't know, any sort of, what's the word?
Like extra interventions.
Interventions that I may not have wanted. And so we drove, our hospital was 40 minutes from where we live. And that was kind of a rough car ride. And the entire drive, I was just kneeling like backwards in my seat. I had my head like swooped over on Sam's shoulders, and I just was slowly breathing through the contractions. Like I really relied on those slow, deep breaths. So we got to the hospital around like 8:30 p.m. and we continued laboring there in the chapel with our doula. And I just remember seeing her, and it immediately gave me this like boost of energy, because obviously we were talking to her on the phone and whatnot, but just being able to see her was really exciting. And, she was very encouraging in just the way that she spoke to me. And I felt like, just the stuff that she was saying, like breathe the baby down and out, don't fight it, like surrender to each contraction. And there's one thing she kept saying that I loved, and it was, your breath is your baby's breath. And that just reminded me that in order to keep him safe, to get him the oxygen that he needs during this process, I need to breathe. And that helped me know that I wasn't just doing this for myself, I was also doing this for my child. And those reminders just kept me like locked in and like just very calm. And so when we got there, she did start telling me, okay, you're going to have to start like squatting with each contraction to move the baby down. Cause she felt my stomach and she's like, he's still kind of high, and you could still feel like pretty high up. He hadn't dropped low enough yet. And so she's like, I want you to hold the back of the pew, and for the next 5 contractions, just squat into them, like tuck your pelvis and just squat in the contraction. And obviously it was very intense doing it that way, because you really just have to like relax your body. But I would hold the pew, and when the contraction came, I would just like try to relax every single muscle in my body into that contraction and just like breathe him down and out. And so we did that for a while, and eventually my contractions started getting a little spacey. And I told her, I'm like, I don't know why, but they're just something about it's just not as intense anymore. And so she goes, the baby's probably not centered. There's probably something wrong with the positioning. And she felt my stomach again. And she was like, I want you to go back to side lying, but do it on the opposite side from what you did at home. And she's like, do 3 contractions in the side lying. And so I got in the side lying position, and I did 3 contractions. And just like at home, after that 3rd contraction, I sat up and I just threw up immediately from the intensity. And she was, and then in the same moment, my waters also broke, and I just felt it. It was like I threw up, and at the same time, I'm like sitting in a pool of water, and I'm like, oh no. And I'm like, Dorzanne, I think my waters just broke. And she's like, are you sure you didn't just, pee on yourself? Because the timing was so weird. She's like, did you just pee on yourself maybe? And I'm like, I don't think so. And so we went to a nearby bathroom, and she did check, and she was like, yeah, I think based on the smell, this is probably your bag of waters. And so since we were in the bathroom already at that moment, she had me sit backwards on the toilet for a few contractions. Once again, those were extremely intense. I know they call the toilet like the dilation station. But that's when she kind of stood behind me, and she could see that I had dropped. Like she could see that he had dropped. And so she's like, I think it's time. I think it's time for you to get checked into triage. Like I can tell that something's different. And so at this point, it was about 10 o'clock. And we were getting checked into triage. Sam had all of my administrative info. I would, to other moms, just make sure your husband has all of that, because you don't want to be the one trying to give out social security numbers and whatever other information that they need when you're like, maybe 8-9 centimeters dilated. And so Sam checked me in, and I remember we just got put into this like curtained room. It wasn't like an actual like walled room. It was just like a little curtain that barely wrapped around a bed, with a little monitor screen in there. And they just had us wait in there. And I just remember it was like 45 minutes of us waiting. And I was like, this is not good. Like But I think that because I was a first time mom, and because I wasn't making any noise, like I was just breathing the whole time. And so like, I think they were like, oh, she's fine. She's probably like not nearly as far along as she probably thinks she is. But in the meantime, I'm sitting there like, I feel like I have to poop. I feel a lot of pressure down there. But I was just like, I was unable to even communicate that at that point. I was just like, I need to focus on breathing. But Sam could tell like that I was in quite a bit of pain at this point. And so 45 minutes later, it's 10:45, and this lady, or about 10:40, I would say, she comes in, and the nurse immediately checks baby's heart rate, and it was like dangerously low. And I just remember this immediate concern on her face, and she's like, honey, you need to get on your side. And so I got on my side, and she monitor his heart rate again. And she was like, okay, his heart rate's improving. And I don't know if it was just something about being on my back on that bed. Maybe he was wonky or something with the cord. I don't know. But as soon as I went to my side, his heart rate improved. But the doctor that was like outside of the curtain was concerned. And he was like, prepare her for an emergency C-section. And I had no idea that this was happening until after, when Sam told me and my doula told me. I had no idea because I was just focusing on breathing. I was like in another zone. And so I could tell she got kind of frantic, and she's trying to get like the IVs in my hands and my arms, and she's poking me over and over again, but she cannot find my vein. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so awful. And finally my doula goes, she knew the nurse, and she goes, so-and-so, just check her. She's got to be close at this point. You need to just check her cervix. And so finally this lady, the nurse just gave up on like trying to get an IV in me because she couldn't get one in. And she reaches her hand in there, underneath my gown. And she's like, oh my gosh, she goes, complete +2. She presses some button or like some speaker. I don't even remember. She's like, complete +2. She's like, honey, we're about to have a baby. And I think she felt his head like immediately. She was like, you're ready to go. So I was 10 centimeters dilated, 100% of face, +2 station. So he was ready to be pushed out. And so I just remember they like pulled up the railings on the bed that I was on, and I was just rushed out of triage into a room. And I get to this room, and all the nurses are like gloving up. They're like, it's just so frantic. Everybody's just like prepping for the baby to arrive. And, I was still just in my zone. And I just remember nurses around me going, oh my gosh, there's no way. Like she's in like the end of labor right now. Like, this is crazy. She's so calm. Like, I remember one nurse looking at my husband going, you should be scared of her. And I thought that was funny. I'm like, I do consider myself a tough girl. So I was like, I love that. But we get into the room, and they put me on my side, and they start monitoring the baby. And they have like I don't know if it's like a contraction monitor to tell you like essentially when the contractions are coming. And they were like, all right, on the next contraction, we want you to push. And I was on my side at this point, and pushing on your side is very uncomfortable. I don't know why. It didn't feel natural. It didn't feel right. And I think they were worried about his heart rate, so they wanted to keep me on my side. But I just hated that feeling of being on my side. It felt like I couldn't push right. And I had always imagined like pushing on all fours, but something about how I was and how he was positioned, I was like, I want to be on my back. And so after like a couple unsuccessful pushes on my side, I asked, I was like, can I please go on my back? Like, something about this feels super uncomfortable. And so they're like, as long as his heart rate is okay. And so they put me on my back. They checked his heart rate. His heart rate was perfectly fine on my back. And so they were like, yeah, you're good to push on your back. So I had my doula on one knee and a nurse on the other. And as I pushed, they were like pulling my knees, I guess, kind of towards my chest. And what I really loved about pushing is that they allowed me to kind of control the tempo. There were times where I felt a contraction coming and they could see it, and they're like, all right, get ready to push. And I said, I don't want to push this. This doesn't feel like intense enough. It doesn't feel strong enough. And so they kind of let me dictate when I felt comfortable pushing, and I didn't feel like I was told when to push and how long to push for. They let me kind of choose what contractions I wanted to push with. And I love that, because it is kind of, it's not necessarily something you want someone else to control because they're not in your body. And so I'm pushing on my back, and I did a couple pushes there, and that we got to a point where he was like peekabooing, kind of coming in and out around my pelvic bone. And I remember the doctor saying, I can see his hair. He has black hair. And so I knew that he was there. But they're like, all right, Daizjah. I remember they said they recommended my knees going in and my ankles out to try to open up that area so he can curve around like my pelvic bone. And so I was like, all right, let's do it. And so we did one push like that, and his head came out. And at this point, I did have a birthing mirror in there, so I could see kind of all of this happening. So I saw his head come out, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's almost there. And then after that one push with my knees in and legs and ankles out, I went back to normal where they were pushing my knees into my chest. And I did one more push like that, and the rest of his body came out. And he did have he came out, I don't know if it's called a nuchal hand, where he came out with his hand on his face, which I don't know if I would say the ring of fire wasn't that painful. It's just such a split second of like that burning sensation. I remember I was scared of the ring of fire just because so many women talk about how scary it is and how painful it is, but it wasn't really that bad for me because it was such a split second versus contractions last like, a full minute. The ring of fire was just a split second, and I was like, my baby's here. And so I didn't think that was that bad, but since his hand was on his face, I did have like a small vaginal floor tear, and then I had a like minor periurethral tear. And both of them, I mean, they were stitched up, and they didn't cause me any issues postpartum, and the stitches fell out pretty quickly, and everything healed very well. So that didn't cause me a ton of pain or issues postpartum. But he did come out with his hand on his face. And even when he was a newborn, like having his hands near his face was always like a comforting thing for him, which I thought was cute. But yeah, he was born at, let's see, I did a total of around like 20 to 30 minutes of pushing, and he was born at 11:25 p.m. When he came out, he was brought straight to my chest, and he latched on pretty quickly. And then when we were ready, because it was a part of my birth plan that we wanted to do delayed cord clamping, and I wanted Sam to cut the cord. So they did let me see the cord, and they were like, hey, is this good? Does this look good? Are you ready? And I kind of, looked at my doula like, does that look good? And she's like, yeah, honey, you're good. And so I was like, okay, yeah, Sam is ready to cut the cord. And so Sam cut the cord, and it was a beautiful moment, just us huddling, with him on my chest. And I do remember the delivery of the placenta. I don't know why I didn't really think much about that while planning for birth. But once your baby's on your chest, I just think that like nothing else matters after that. I remember it was kind of uncomfortable. But I didn't even think twice about it just because I'm like, my baby's on my chest, all is well. Like, you can do whatever you want. They stitched me up with him on my chest. He stayed there. Now, I didn't do the full consecutive golden hour. I do remember he was on my chest for probably 20 or 30 minutes. And then one of the nurses came, and she was like, can I just see him for a second? I'm going to do his measurements and his weight. And I didn't even like think, and I was like, yeah, sure. And so she took them, and I should have been like, oh, wait, no. And I remember my doula was like, I thought you didn't. And I was like, oh, that's right. But it was only a second. He was gone. She brought him back to my chest, and we continued with him on my chest, and we did skin to skin. But yeah, overall, it was honestly a good experience. I spent such little time, I guess, in that kind of like setting of being in a hospital room, because it was our home for majority of it, the hospital chapel for an hour and a half. And then by the time I got checked into triage, I was ready to go. So it did feel kind of like very quick at the end there. But I really did love just that time of just being able to labor at home in an environment I felt safe and with my husband and just kind of protected. That was really special for me.
Oh, that's awesome. What a neat story, Daizjah. That's incredible.
Yes.
There were like several things in there that it was very, very detailed and just amazing. I am curious if I can bring it all the way back to the beginning, just some questions. You had mentioned, for example, at the beginning of your pregnancy, how you weren't sick. You got really lucky that way, and like you felt good. Did you, since you do CrossFit and stuff like that, I'm curious about maybe how often you were working out and what your nutrition looked like. Would you be willing to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah. So like I said, I did CrossFit all the way up until about 33, 34 weeks. And I was pretty good about going at least 3 times, 3 to 4 times a week. And even if I wasn't doing a CrossFit class, I was doing some sort of exercise every single day pretty much. And I do think that that helped with just keeping me healthy during pregnancy. And I know that there's still women who are very active that can face complications. So I don't want to say if you work out, you're going to be perfectly fine. But I do think it helped. I think it helped with just, being able to keep myself healthy and being able to contract the muscles I needed to contract during pushing and relax the muscles I needed to relax when I was laboring. Just having that, I guess just being so in tune with my body through exercise helped me be in tune with my body during labor. And for the nutrition aspect, I will say I wasn't like the best. I wasn't the type of person that like ate super healthy by any means. I did try to focus on whole foods as much as I could, avoiding processed foods, avoiding, lots of sugars and things like that. I focused on just high protein nutrition. In that's really important, I guess, for pregnancy. I also took like a prenatal every single day, prenatal vitamin, and just focused on drinking a lot of water. I drank a ton of water throughout my pregnancy. And obviously at the end there, it's good and bad because you're just like peeing all the time. But like I did drink a lot of water, which I think is just important for keeping yourself healthy.
Yeah. How about during your labor? I was curious to know how the labor support was helping you. You had mentioned your doula said some affirmations and things like that. Was it a lot of hands-on support? Like, what did their support look like for you, and what was the best for you? What was the most
Yeah.
helpful for you?
No, that's a good question. I didn't mention that. Yeah, obviously my doula was there alongside of me, and I guess I didn't mention much about Sam either. We practiced like a lot of like we did labor rehearsals and stuff at home, and so we practiced like counter pressure and things like that I thought I would want and need. But when the time came, I realized that I didn't really want to be touched. So as far as the interactions during the time I was in labor, I really just wanted my doula and Sam near me. And just their presence, I guess, was amazing for me. And even for Sam, I would tell him, a hand on my back, or, just a hand on my belly or whatever, just touching me or being near me was all I really wanted. There was one point during labor, I remember that Sam tried to do counter pressure, and I was like, I don't even think it was that he was doing it wrong. I just didn't want to be like touched in that way. And so neither my doula or him really did any sort of counter pressure or anything on me. I was okay with just being by myself, but in their presence. Like I wanted them nearby. And not only was my doula giving me positive affirmations, but Sam was also too. I think it was so special for me to hear him constantly say, he was saying over and over again, "I'm so proud of you." And to hear that from your husband who's watching you labor, and just to hear him say like, "I'm just so proud of you. You're crushing this. Like you're doing so well. You're so calm," was just really special for me, because I did love those words of affirmation while I was, it kept me going truly. So just having them nearby, having that hand on my back, all of those things were very helpful during labor.
That's awesome. And lastly, before we get into the like advice for moms, advice for dads, because I love to end with that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your contractions felt like. So in the beginning, you kind of described them as similar to Braxton Hicks, but you had that period cramp feeling. Where were you feeling them? What was that intensity like? And if you can kind of walk women through that.
Yes. So like I said, the first one was that Braxton Hicks feeling with the period cramp. And I only felt my contractions really in the front. I would say that was majority of my labor. It was just in the front, kind of lower, like my lower front area. And then towards the end, I remember when we got checked in the triage room, that's when it wrapped around to my back. So I had to have been at the tail end there, probably 8, 9, 10 centimeters dilated. And that's when it started wrapping around in my back. And I almost felt like my back like seized up. That's how like painful it was, because it was just wrapping around to my back, and those were very intense. So all the power to women that experience back labor for a majority of their labor, because for me, just that tail end, that last like 30, 40 minutes, of experiencing front to back labor was pretty brutal. And those are definitely harder to even like move through because your back feels like it's like almost tightened up or locked up or something. And so mine did end up wrapping around in my back as it got more intense. But yeah, that I would say that's the easiest way to explain it is that like cramping sensation with the tightening at the same time is the best way to explain what a contraction feels like.
Yeah. When you mentioned like you couldn't move through the like back one, so were you finding that a lot of movement was helpful for you? Is that kind of what you were doing during labor?
100%. I mean, I explained how my doula would tell me to get in the side lying or to go to squat and to hold something and squat. I think all of those times were oftentimes associated with my most intense contractions because it was moving him down. I think that the more stagnant I was, or if I just sat there, the contractions weren't, or I would say they weren't as productive versus if I moved alongside the contractions, that's when they got so intense. And that intensity I knew was the fact that my baby was getting lower and closer to being born. So I think movement was absolutely pivotal in how quickly my labor went. I guess I didn't talk about that, but for a first time mom, I would say my labor went by pretty quickly. I'm not like super fast, but from active labor was probably around like 5:30 p.m. and he was born at 11:30. So it really wasn't that much time that I was in that active labor stage. And I was convinced that he might have been born even on January 6th, but he was right before midnight. So yeah, I do think labor or movement helped push things along pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's great. All right, before you jump off, let's hear your best advice for moms, best advice for partners.
Yes. So for moms, I know I mentioned it before, but breathing is so important. If I only had, 1 week to prep for birth, I would absolutely just practice your breathing. Obviously, all those little physical things like stretching and stuff matters, but being able to control your breathing helps you control your mind, helps you control your body. And that was so important for me. And if I didn't have any time to prep for labor, I would absolutely just choose to practice my breathing. That's so important. I like the term like callous your mind. I think practicing your breathing helps you callous your mind and prep it for labor. And I felt like that helped me a lot. And then for dads, I would just say, you might think that there's nothing you can do when your wife is in labor, but please don't be an innocent bystander, just standing there, unhelpful. There's so much that you can do. And the My Essential Birth course talks you through each phase of labor and how you can get involved in each phase of labor. And even if it's just simply educating yourself, that will mean so much to your wife, just to educate yourself on labor, and her seeing you be able to know what's going on, be able to maybe talk through the terms or understand what's happening will be so comforting for her and make her feel even safer. So even though you might think that there's nothing you can do, you can always educate yourself, and you can do that through the birth course. You can do that through podcasts, watching videos. I know I made my husband, we watched birth vlogs while we ate dinner. And so that was always like something I like to do, is find ones where I felt like, I'm like, I want our labor to look like that. And he was always, eager and wanting to just support me in that way. Even though like you probably will end up knowing way more about pregnancy and labor than you ever wanted to know, but it'll mean so much for that birthing mom to just be able to have you support her in that way.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Daizjah. What an incredible story. And you did an excellent job at telling it and including so much detail. So thank you for being here today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
If you loved what you heard today, the very best way to support this podcast and help other moms to find it is to leave a quick review. I read one at the beginning of the episodes, and I would love for yours to be next. And if you're ready for even more pregnancy, birth, and postpartum goodness, come join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I will hold your hand and walk you through pregnancy and birth step by step so you're totally prepared for a birth you'll love. See you next week.